What are some of the strangest crimes people actually do? Let's start with number 6, the talented Miss Nasyrova. Viktoria Nasyrova has made quite a name for herself in the tabloids with her twisted and criminal escapades. Her story's like something out of a spy movie, filled with poisons, fake identities, and people turning up not alive. In August 2016, Nasyrova hatched this wild plan to poison her lookalike eyelash artist Olga Tsvyk with a special cheesecake laced with a potent Russian tranquilizer and then take over her life. Nasyrova was pretty smart to use cheesecake. Anyway, Nasyrova showed up at Tsvyk's place in Queens pretending she needed some emergency eyelash magic. As a thank you, she brought along a cheesecake from a fancy bakery. Nasyrova ate 2 slices and offered the third to Tsvyk. Within minutes of devouring that tainted treat, Tsvyk started feeling sick. And we're not talking about bubble guts type sick. More like she's puking her guts out type sick. Taking advantage of Olga's weakened state, Nasyrova swiped her passport, cash, and employment card. She even went the extra mile and tried to make it look like Olga killed herself by scattering pills everywhere. What's really crazy is that Nasyrova actually ate 2 of the 3 slices of cake, so it was like playing Russian roulette. Luckily, Tsvyk survived the poisoning ordeal. It was her sister who stumbled upon the scene, quickly called the cops, saving her life. This wasn't Nasyrova's first time doing something like this either. She was linked to another similar case back in Russia, where her neighbor, Alla Alexenko, met a terrible end. Nasyrova managed to escape the clutches of justice by fleeing to the good old US of A. Nasyrova was also accused of pumping guys she met on dating sites full of substances, making them drowsy, and robbing them too. You're probably thinking, wow, she sounds great. Can she be Russia's sweetheart and America's sweetheart? Well, no, she can't. She has to choose. Justice eventually caught up with Nasyrova. Alexenko's daughter, who was also living in New York, was horrified to discover that this Nasyrova was living just a stone's throw away in Brooklyn. Alexenko had hired a private eye to track Nasyrova down, and that's when she was finally hauled in. In the courtroom, Nasyrova strutted in, dressed casually like she didn't have a care in the world. But the judge wasn't messing around. He slapped her with a 21-year prison sentence, cutting her some slack by shaving off 4 years from the maximum punishment of 25 years for some reason. You'd think she'd show some remorse, but oh no. Instead, Nasyrova started yelling and cursed out the judge right in the courtroom. Number 5, trying not to exist. Julie M. Wheeler, a woman from West Virginia, got herself caught up in a real mess. She was entrusted with taking care of a patient who had spina bifida, and she was getting paid a hefty sum of over $736 a day by the Department of Veterans Affairs to do it. But instead of doing her job and providing the care the patient needed, she decided to just lie and say she did. But Julie got caught and was facing some serious charges for healthcare fraud and was looking at a possible 10-year prison sentence. That's a long time to spend behind bars. So she came up with a crazy plan to fake her own death. Julie thought she could escape the consequences of her actions by pretending to fall over a cliff at the New River Gorge National Park in West Virginia. The authorities launched a massive search operation that lasted for 3 days in an attempt to recover the body. They had helicopters, search dogs, and even a diving crew. They were really putting in the effort to locate her, but little did they know it was all a big bamboozling. As it turns out, Julie was hiding in a closet in her own house the whole time. She had planned this whole disappearance in advance, thinking she could just vanish and avoid facing the consequences of her actions. But the truth always has a way of coming out. Once they found her, Julie and her husband Rodney were arrested. They were hit with charges of conspiracy and providing false information to the police. Even Julie's son was dragged into this mess. He was implicated in the criminal complaint, accused of helping plant evidence to make it seem like his mom had fallen from the cliff. Julie pleaded guilty to the fraud charges she was facing. She finally admitted to her role in the scheme and the harm she caused. The whole situation is a reminder that actions have consequences. Julie thought she could outsmart everyone by faking her passing, but she ended up getting caught and bringing trouble upon herself and her family instead. Number 4, it's no biggie. Clayton Jacobs, a cunning fraudster from Florida, executed a strange plan when he checked into the glamorous Mondrian Hotel in Manhattan. The strange part about it was this. He used the name Biggie Smalls, the name famously associated with the late rapper. For a whopping 3 months, Jacobs reveled in the lap of luxury, amassing an astonishing bill totaling over $47,000. You'd think someone would have made the connection, but the hotel staff completely missed the significance of the name. American Express eventually started rejecting Jacobs' credit card charges after his extravagant spree, but it took the hotel an additional month before they finally caught on and took action. It's weird that no one realized the association with the legendary rapper Christopher Wallace, who tragically lost his life in 1997. Even the hotel employees who had seen the name Biggie Smalls on the guest list failed to connect it to the iconic rapper. It wasn't until after the news of Jacob's scam broke that they realized the extent of their oversight. One can't help but wonder how such an audacious scheme went undetected for so long. During his stay, Jacobs indulged in the finer things, but the specific details of his purchases aren't disclosed in the lawsuit. Nevertheless, it's safe to assume that his extravagant bill included lavish room service, exquisite dining experiences, and indulging in the hotel's upscale amenities, all on someone else's tab. Jacobs managed to enjoy the Mondrian Hotel's lavish accommodations for a staggering 3 months before his grand charade was exposed. The hotel has taken legal action against him to recover the outstanding balance of $47,197.95. How he managed to maintain his deceptive facade for such an extended period remains a mystery. As of now, there are no reported criminal complaints against Clayton Jacobs regarding his scam. The motive behind his choice of the Biggie Smalls alias and his ability to fly under the radar for several months continue to intrigue those following this odd tale of deception and indulgence. It's a case that'll forever be notorious. Number 3, the Fresh Breath Bandit. The Fresh Breath Bandit, a nickname given to a suspect by the York Regional Police in Markham, Ontario, has gained notoriety for his minty act of shoplifting. On the evening of December 17th, he entered a pharmacy and carried out daring heist. Surveillance captured the thief walking down several aisles before stopping in front of a rack of candy. In a meticulously planned operation, he started filling up garbage bags with packages of chewing gum. After loading one bag, he left and returned moments later to fill another. The stolen gum, valued at $1,528, was a significant haul, and the York Regional Police have released the security footage to the public in the hopes of identifying the suspect. While theft obviously isn't uncommon, it's a little strange to think about what he planned to do with all that gum. Interestingly, this isn't the first time a similar crime has occurred. According to reports, a comparable gum theft took place at the same store a year earlier. Additionally, there were reports of gum being stolen from a nearby store on the same night. The repetition suggests the possibility of a serial gum thief, and the crime remains unsolved. It left detectives with nothing to chew on. Number 2, the fake kidnapping. Larry Wayne Price Jr., a resident of Tazewell County, embarked on a journey of deception and fraud, leaving a trail of chaos in his wake. First and foremost, Larry Price Jr. is a scammy type of guy, as in, he's always wearing his scamming underoos. Price engaged in a series of schemes, defrauding multiple companies in the coal mining industry. With a plan in motion, he embezzled a staggering sum of $20.3 million from these companies. Now, let's dive into the perplexing case of Price's alleged abduction. He came up with an elaborate story claiming to have been kidnapped and robbed for his keys and firearm before being thrown out of a van into the street. But when the FBI questioned him, he changed the story. Now it was the notorious Pagans Motorcycle Club that kidnapped him. As a side note, it's probably not the best idea to call out a notoriously, let's call it, a hands-on motorcycle club for a crime they didn't commit. You probably don't want these guys even knowing your name, let alone accusing them of something they didn't do. They probably wouldn't have a problem actually doing it. Price resided in a mansion, and it was a testament to his ill-gotten wealth. Situated in the grandeur of Billings, Montana, this residence spanned an astonishing 26,000 square feet. Valued at over $10 million, it stood as a monument to his extravagant lifestyle. Nevertheless, Price's lavish way of life masked an enormous load of debt. He found himself indebted to a Wyoming-based company named Three Blind Mice, owing a staggering $11 million. Additionally, he owed substantial amounts to 2 medical professionals in Montana and an individual in Billings. As the investigation unfolded, cracks in Price's story grew. The story had more cracks than a plumber's convent. Faced with the truth closing in on him, Price was forced to change the story yet again. The reality of his whereabouts during the supposed abduction came to light, revealing that he had really been with his mistress the whole time, and they were hatching a plan to disappear together. The unraveling of Price's deceit was revealed by text messages that revealed the inconsistencies in his accounts. These digital breadcrumbs made it impossible for him to deny the truth any longer. As his web of lies unraveled, Price found himself in a precarious position, desperately grasping for a new narrative. Enter his mistress, who became a central figure in his revised version of events. She corroborated his new story, adding another layer of complexity to the already convoluted tale. It became evident that Price was willing to exploit anyone and everyone to maintain his charade, blurring the lines between truth and fiction. Moreover, Price's flagrant disregard for the law extended to firearms. Despite having a prior conviction that prohibited him from owning firearms, he maintained an extensive arsenal of 57 weapons. Larry Wayne Price Jr. received a 5-year prison sentence, so in a sense, he did disappear. If you're enjoying this video, be sure to stay tuned right here for our past release to find out the strange way this guy pretended to being different women in Hollywood. Number 1. Sleepwalking? Marius Petricus from Killingworth in the UK created a havoc-filled spectacle when he targeted a local pub. Petricus broke into City Tavern, situated in the heart of Newcastle, late at night. Once Petricus got inside, he walked behind the bar and grabbed the drink and inexplicably went on a rampage. His path of destruction knew no bounds as he trashed the bar, overturning furniture and barricading himself with beer barrels and anything he could find. Then the pub's owner, David King, arrived the next morning and faced the grim reality of financial losses exceeding £21,000. This was an especially devastating blow considering the pub was already struggling due to the pandemic shutdown. King called the cops, and when they arrived, they were met with a surprising sight. Petricus fast asleep on a sofa inside the bar, like a destructive little cherub. But when they tried to apprehend him, things took an intense turn. The police had to taser Petricus, a jaw-dropping 6 times in their desperate attempts to subdue him. Remarkably, Petricus remained defiant in the face of this repeated electrical massaging. Driven by a desperate desire to escape, Petricus took a daring leap out of a window. Hey, it worked in Die Hard. However, it resulted in a head injury. Petricus's bid for freedom was short-lived as he recklessly charged at the police officers who swiftly took him into custody. This wasn't the first instance of Petricus unleashing such destructive tendencies, as he had previously been in a physical altercation that caused criminal damage against a former landlord. Petricus pleaded guilty to the burglary charges. The court system swiftly delivered its judgment, sentencing him to 12 months behind bars, but due to the time already served in jail, Petricus was released almost immediately. And we're pretty sure we know what bar he didn't go to when he got out. Imagine you're an aspiring screenwriter working on a project that just had its funding approved. You have the opportunity to travel to Indonesia to begin researching and gathering material for your script. Since you're in another country, you need to worry about your transportation, food expenses, and ensuring that you have a translator on site. You're still waiting for the funds for the project to be released, but you know that it'll happen, so you're not worried about using your own money to cover the expenses up front. You throw yourself into your work, but still spend time speaking to Hollywood executives where nothing seems out of place until one day you find out that the whole thing was a hoax. This happened to Gregory Mandarano, a screenwriter from Long Island, New York. In the summer of 2015, he traveled to Indonesia 6 times to work on an upcoming project. But Mandarano would certainly not be this scam's first or last victim. Hargobind Tahirlamani is an Indonesian man who managed to scam multiple people by impersonating males and females. Hargobind grew up in Jakarta, Indonesia, where he grew up with an affluent lifestyle. His father was a film producer and wrote rom-com and dramatic movie scripts. It was when Hargobind's mother died that his life fell apart. And then, his father's death led to tension with his siblings over the family inheritance. Soon, he was cast out from his family after he and his siblings fell out over property disputes. He attended school in Jakarta before he moved to the US to attend college. In 2000, he went by the alias of Harvey when he participated in the National Forensic Association competition in persuasive speaking. He placed in the quarterfinals, and this wouldn't be the first time that he would pretend to be Harvey. However, he was disqualified from a tournament after getting caught plagiarizing. Hargobind started calling various people involved with the tournament to air out his frustrations. However, rather than making calls as himself, he decided that he needed a more powerful name that would catch people's attention. This was when people involved in the tournament started receiving calls from Cate Blanchett, who claimed to be calling to represent him. Of course, it wasn't the Australian Academy Award-winning actress that people were speaking to. It was Hargobind. Hargobind's crimes date back to the early 2000s, starting when he was still a student. Public court records state that he and a few others were a part of a lawsuit over the misappropriation of school funds. The Hollywood Reporter also discovered that he was booked for falsifying checks in Las Vegas. The Hollywood Reporter also uncovered that he was arrested on embezzlement charges in his home country of Indonesia. It didn't take long for him to set his eyes on Hollywood, where he would commit most of his crimes. He used his knowledge of how the Hollywood industry worked to his advantage, aware that he could make people trust him if he pretended to be the right person. His ability to impersonate whoever he wanted made it easy for him to carry out some of his biggest cons. Not all of his crimes targeted celebrities. Dozens of the people he scammed were ordinary workers on set. vets, such as photographers, makeup artists, and stunt performers. He'd convince them to go to Indonesia, where he'd make big promises of work and high budgets to accommodate their stays. He asked the marks to pay for their own expenses, like transportation, hotels, and food, with the promise that they'd be reimbursed. What Hargobind would do is simply overcharge them for expenses. He'd be in charge of making sure his marks had what they needed. He simply acted as an overly expensive middleman. Many of them willingly did this, even if they were paying thousands, even tens of thousands of dollars in expenses. On top of his travel scam, Hargobind was also the host of the food-centric Instagram account Pure Bites. Although he never identified himself on the account, he managed to gain 50,000 followers. It used the tagline, "Every meal has a story," and he presented himself as someone who grew up in Indonesia and the US. The account had photos and videos of well-photographed meals from some of the fanciest restaurants in the United Kingdom. He'd mention his escapades exploring London's culinary scene and would use his platform to promote different restaurants. He sometimes rounded out the posts with mentions of his love life, his relationship with his parents, or the time he spent exploring London's culinary cuisine. Sometimes he told fans about struggling with potentially life-threatening illnesses such as pancreatic cancer. The Clerkenwell Boy, another faceless Instagram account, is an account that also documents restaurants in London and has 250,000 followers. One thing that Hargobind wanted more than anything was adulation. He was an opportunist and would fawn over anyone he met that he felt could help him raise his status. If he were talking to someone of high status, he would laugh too hard at their jokes or compliment them so much that it would make them uncomfortable. When he wasn't worshiping high-profile people he met, he was name-dropping other people he knew. He wanted to make it clear that he was well-connected in the London restaurant scene. Paul Hansen is a highly regarded photographer in the industry. He was contacted one day in 2018 by a man named Gavin Ambani. Ambani wanted pictures for his Instagram account and felt that Hansen would be the perfect person to take them. Ambani was Hargobind's new alias and the one that he would use to promote his Instagram account. But Ambani wouldn't accept no for an answer. He name-dropped Sarah Packer and Itamar Surlovich, the chef owners of Honey & Company, a popular Middle Eastern restaurant in London. While he claimed to have a close relationship with Packer and Surlovich, the couple only knew him as a customer at one of their restaurants. Ambani spoke to Surlovich one day about Karam Sethi, one of the people behind the Michelin-starred Gymkhana restaurant in Mayfair. When Surlovich spoke about his admiration for Sethi's work, Ambani offered to introduce them to one another. However, Sethi knew of Ambani for the wrong reasons. Ambani had gone to Sethi's restaurant, Trishna, 4 or 5 times. While Sethi saw him when he was there, he thought Ambani was just an ordinary customer. But then, after feeling disgruntled about how the staff treated him at the restaurant, Ambani sent a slew of emails complaining about the service at the restaurant, so much so that he caught Sethi's attention. According to Ambani, a staff member wasn't giving him the attention that he felt he deserved when he was there. He was heated and threatened to call Michelin and his attorneys. Sethi personally called Ambani to smooth things over, and that's when Ambani's demeanor completely changed. Rather than continuing with his threats, he expressed admiration for the chef, as if he was Sethi's superfan. Since Ambani knew some of his friends, he agreed to get a coffee with Ambani to discuss the project. Ambani told him that he grew up in India and was born into a wealthy family. He said he worked for Netflix in the UK and claimed his goal was to become a key influencer in the food world. Ambani planned to develop a gastronomy channel by developing the TV side of Instagram. Ambani called upon his restaurant friends for the locations of the 2 shoots. The first was at Zoo Tea House in Chinatown. The second shoot was done at Honey & Smoke, owned by Packer and Surlovich. In one shot, Ambani sat while several servers poured teapots with rainbow colors out in front of him to represent that Ambani was gay. At Honey & Smoke, he broke bread with Packer and Surlovich, which was supposed to be a symbol for breaking the social barriers with their Israeli Middle Eastern cooking. He went as far as to say that he stood for breaking down barriers. The shoots were successful, and the photographs were in Hansen's signature dramatic yet intimate style. Then came time for the payment, which was over £4,000. Ambani claimed that there was a technical issue and that he had to transfer money from his aunt's American bank account, which was where his money was tied up. Of course, he promised he would get Hansen the money soon. Hansen found Ambani odd, but wasn't worried about getting his money. After all, why would a fraudster show his face so much and even document his scam through public photographs? However, some time passed, and Hansen still wasn't paid. Ambani's excuses became more implausible, such as when he said he would physically deliver the money one day but then didn't show up. Other times they spoke about the money, Ambani asked for more time. Eventually, Hansen asked Surlovich to check Ambani's bank statement as he was growing suspicious over whether Ambani was who he said he was. Ambani found out about this and was furious with Hansen. He accused Hansen of defamation, a criminal act, for contacting Surlovich. He also said that Hansen telling Surlovich about the weird situation with the money made him really upset. Hansen was never paid. Hansen's photographs were still used on the Pure Bites Instagram account, but Pure Bites eventually removed them after receiving repeated reminders that he never paid for the work. Hargobind's next scam would be set up around him impersonating multiple executives that worked for the China Film Group, a mainland China film company that had handled several large productions. One of his victims from his China Film Group days was Gregory Mandarano. He was from Long Island, New York. As an aspiring screenwriter, he jumped at the opportunity to travel to Indonesia for an upcoming project. In the summer of 2015, he went with his writing partner to Indonesia 6 times to pursue the project. Their issue was the finances for the project. They believed the money was approved. It just had to be released. In the meantime, they would have to cover expenses themselves, understanding that they would be reimbursed when the money became available. Covering expenses for themselves was getting expensive, but they knew they had to do it while they waited for the rest of the financing. A producer for China Film Group named Anand Sippy met with the pair regularly while they were in the country. Mandarano was also in touch with many executives at China Film Group, all reassuring him that they would get their money soon. However, Mandarano was not speaking to multiple high-powered executives in the film industry as he thought. In fact, he would soon learn that he was only talking to one person the entire time. And Anand Sippy, who had served as one of the only people they'd met in person from the China Film Group, was the mastermind behind a huge scam. He had to fund his own expenses during his 6 trips to the country. By the time he found out about the truth, he'd wasted $70,000 of his own money to cover the trips. Hargobind had many aliases. Throughout his time as a fraudster, he developed multiple personas that were male and female. All of the evidence gathered over the years makes it clear that aliases such as Gavin Ambani, Lal Gobind, and so many others were all just Hargobind. Of course, then there are the famous people he impersonated, starting back when he pretended to be Kate Blanchett. Henry Wu, a photographer, was delighted when he was contacted by Wendy Dang Murdoch, who was once married to the media mogul Rupert Murdoch. Wendy reached out to him and his partner Zori Shanchenka about taking on an assignment abroad for an exhibition that was part of the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. Hargobind began impersonating Wendy to lure Henry and Zori to Indonesia. The San Francisco-based pair are co-editors of the photography site This Life of Travel. They were flattered that Wendy reached out to them and probably hoped that it would be the start of an ongoing professional relationship. Wendy complimented them on their photography, saying it was exactly what she wanted. The project was to photograph Chinese immigrant communities in Southeast Asia and to portray the Chinese essence that these communities represented. To make the story more plausible, Hargobind added Aaron, Wendy's assistant. Henry received a call from a man named Aaron, who was supposedly Wendy Murdoch's assistant. He wanted to talk to the pair about the details of the project. After speaking for a minute with a thick New Yorker accent, he said he'd connect them with Wendy. There was a momentary pause, and then they were on the phone with her. Her accent was unique, with Asian, British, and American influences mixed together. Even though they spoke to Wendy, or at least who they thought was Wendy, the pair were becoming a little bit suspicious, and one of their anxieties was that her listed lawyer didn't seem to exist. While they were concerned, it didn't stop them from signing their contract and making plans for their trip to Indonesia. Their job was to photograph people in several cities around the country, including Jakarta. And then they were told that they would have to pay the initial costs of their airfares and other expenses, but that they would be reimbursed for everything when they were paid for the project. It was risky and meant that they had to pay thousands of dollars of their own money. They still hadn't met Wendy or Aaron in person, but this was an excellent opportunity, and they trusted that Wendy would reimburse them at the end of the project. A high-profile connection like Wendy made it worth it for them, but their excitement turned to concern when they arrived in Jakarta. Aaron called them right as they landed to tell them they'd be responsible for even more costs than they realized. Even though they were promised they'd be reimbursed, they still had to pay fees like a $1,500 photography permit that they were asked by Aaron to make payable to the driver who picked them up. The next day, they received a call from a furious Wendy, who accused the pair of racism after taking photographs of the driver. She claimed they were unauthorized and even threatened to cancel the entire project. Panicked, they promised to fix the misunderstanding. Wendy informed them that they'd have to pay for another photography permit, as the one they bought the previous day was suddenly invalid. This was when it became clear to the pair that something wasn't right, and they were confident it was some sort of scam. Many other people, like Henry, trusted Hargabind because he impersonated well-known people. The list of people that Hargabind likely impersonated is long. He imitated Megan Ellison, a film producer, Barbara Booth, Ellison's mother, and Amy Pascal. Authorities also believe that he pretended to be Star Wars producer Kathleen Kennedy, and ex-Paramount executive Shelley Lansing, and former Sony movie chief Amy Pascal. Hargabind's scams followed a similar pattern. He would offer Hollywood workers, like photographers, makeup artists, and stunt performers, a job in Indonesia. Working with people in Hollywood that were determined to bring their dreams to life made it much easier for Hargabind. Many workers are desperate for the opportunity to find their big breaks, and his scam offered them a path to the success they sought. He kept in constant contact with them as they flew to Indonesia. He would give them projects such as creating mood boards for photo shoots, enacting sides of dialogue that he sent them, or even auditions on the phone. They always thought they were close to meeting the movie's director or producer, but there were always excuses as to why the shoot was delayed. Every day that they waited to work on these movies was a day where they were forced to fork out even more of their own money. They had to pay for photo permits, driving fees, food, and whatever other expenses came up that day. Hargabind didn't do all this work in Indonesia alone, and it's believed that he had 2 accomplices that collected the money. While his execution was elaborate, at its core, he was committing advance fee fraud. Essentially, his victims were promised that they would receive their reimbursements once the movie funding was released, something that would never happen. Typically, he would pretend to be a male assistant and then have them hold to talk to people like Amy Pascal, which was an elaborate way of making them think that they were about to speak to a different person. Hargabind would pretend to be the assistant and the executive all on the same call. The executives that Hargabind was impersonating didn't know it was happening until victims started calling their offices. They wanted reimbursements for the trips and costs they incurred while in Indonesia, but the executives had no idea what they were talking about. Some of the impersonated executives hired a private security firm as they searched for answers as to why they were being accused of not paying workers. Then, in 2016 and 2019, the FBI opened its own investigation. Hargabind was arrested in Manchester, England in November 2020 at a hotel. At the time, he claimed that he was a writer for Netflix. He's additionally wanted on charges of aggravated identity theft, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and wire fraud in the U.S. A UK district judge will decide in November 2022 whether or not Hargabind will be handed over to the U.S. authorities. Some of the factors that will be considered during the trial are the amount of scams he carried out in the UK and the amount of time that has passed since the crimes occurred. Even if the extradition request is granted, it'll likely take years for Hargabind to go on trial. Authorities believe that he's convinced more people to send him money even while in jail as he's awaiting for his court date. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comments section if you had to get away with a crime that's at least a felony, what crime would you commit?